Aten-hotep returned to his home that evening, leaving Sirti with the night watch under the leadership of Captain Thutmose II. Sirti was surprised at the captain's young age. He seemed not much older than Sirti himself. "Okay, listen here, rookie," Thutmose said sternly. "Aten-hotep might be warden of this place, but on the night shift, I'm in charge. That's because I've been here longer than anyone else, while every other lily-livered officer that comes through here is ready to leave as soon as possible because he's afraid of some poor sons of jackals who died years ago. I've stayed. That means I know more about this place than anyone on the night shift. That means I'm in charge, and that means my word is law. When I tell you to do something, you do it. Understand?" Sirti nodded. "Good. If you get on my good side, I'll help you out, maybe get you on days or help you earn a little extra side money. But if you give me trouble, I'll make your life a living hell, and you'll wish you were down below with the screamers instead. Now, your first job is to clean out the prisoners' sand jars. It might not be the glory and power you had in mind when you joined the Medjay, but someone has to do it, and since you're new here, guess who that someone is?" This day kept getting worse, Sirti thought. When he had woken that morning, he had no idea he would encounter a secret that would shake everything he had known and experienced, and yet now, here he stood, atop a grave where the restless spirits of the dead clamored for freedom. He hadn't yet had the misfortune to hear them, and still half suspected that, despite the warden's sincere insistence it was all truth. "You'll hear for yourself soon enough," he said. It was still some sort of ruse perpetrated on new officers, and now, as his first duty, he was being made to handle human waste, and that of criminals no less. "Shouldn't I familiarize myself with the inmates before going down into the cells?" he asked in a feeble attempt to stave off the unpleasant task. "What kind of operation do you think this is?" Thutmose shot back acrimoniously. "You must be getting this place confused with the academy. We've got better things to do than sit on our asses reading papyrus scrolls. Now get down there and clean out those sand jars." Sirti reminded himself, as he went about the task of emptying the prisoner's waste receptacles, that sometimes his job meant getting his hands dirty and subduing his pride. After all, it wasn't always about glory. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling of being a common leprous street beggar going from house to house, sorting through garbage and offal. The prisoners, with no fear of the new officer's authority, occasionally peppered him with uncouth comments and taunts, to which he resisted retaliation, preferring to show them his stoic professionalism and strength of will. Nonetheless, the comments stung and further acerbated his misery. Sirti noticed that, aside from himself, no other guards were patrolling the cells at that moment. He wasn't sure if this was a mistake or just laziness on behalf of the personnel. As he understood it, there was supposed to be someone in the cells at all times. The prisoners were accustomed to the process of the emptying of their latrines and set out their sand jars full of excrement beyond the bars of their cells. This allowed Sirti to collect their contents in a larger jar, which would, in turn, be carried to and emptied in the gutters outside. Sirti quickly moved from one cell to another, careful to stay far enough away from the bars so that the inmates could not reach him, as he weathered any derogatory comments sent his way, all while avoiding eye contact as much as possible. Suddenly he found himself before a cell in front of which no sand jar had been lain. Breaking his rhythm, he cast an inquisitive gaze inside, only to find it met by the alleged sorcerer within. Sirti had looked upon the face of criminals and killers before his first night in Sumenkhthet, and had seen insanity in men's eyes. But what he saw here was something wholly different from insanity, yet wholly different from typical. Though momentarily unnerved, he maintained his composure. "Do you need your sand jar emptied, prisoner?" The convict said not a word, but instead replied with only a slow shake of his pharaonic head. Mystified and slightly unnerved, Sirti continued his unpleasant business. Upon returning to the upper floors with his feculent payload, Sirti was approached by Thutmose. "Let me take the collecting jar from you," he said to the new guard. "I'll empty it. My way of showing appreciation for your good work on such an unpleasant job. Why don't you go into the archives for a bit and read up on the inmates?" Sirti was pleasantly surprised at this, and considered that perhaps he had misjudged the brash young captain. Following his suggestion, he went to the archives with its chests of rosters and scrolls carefully sorted by date and name. He located several documents detailing the present convicts, and sat down upon a straw mat before the low, broad cedar table in the middle of the room, where he began to read. He started with Abu Shut, whose offenses were listed as manufacture and trade of forbidden pharmaceuticals, desecration of human remains, abetting cannibalism, corpse trafficking. Below this list, the document went into greater detail. Local Medjay officers received information the offender was involved in the sale and manufacture of the illegal substance known as mummy dust. A search of the offender's home revealed 3 illegally procured mummies in various states of disintegration, as well as implements used for their disintegration and conversion into forbidden pharmaceuticals. Ghastly. Surti moved to the next entry. It was Akmotesh III, the alleged sorcerer. Intrigued, he glanced over the list of offenses. Sorcery, murder, conspiracy to assassinate government officials, blasphemy, breaking and entering, robbery, tomb robbery. Intrigued, he skimmed the lengthy entry. Officers of the Medjay had been informed from numerous anonymous sources that the prisoner had been practicing sorcery for nefarious purposes. Found in his possession a variety of ancient relics. Suspect claimed he was a priest of Anubis, lord of the dead, and offered to demonstrate powers given to him by Anubis. Having been warned that the suspect would make such claims for the purpose of deceiving officials and subjecting them to his magic, apprehending officers denied the request, instead taking him directly into custody. It must have been the handling of the sand jars a few moments ago. Surti felt the simultaneous need to produce his own sand jar offering and wash himself of filth at the same time. Stowing the scrolls, he walked out of the archives and toward the latrine. Along the way, he once more encountered Thutmose, who was in the process of carrying the large sand collection vase, which Surti had passed to him earlier, back to its place in the cells below. "I can take that for you, Captain," he said. He could postpone his urges for a few minutes in order to show a gesture of goodwill. "No," Thutmose said briskly, turning away from the new guard and clutching the vase protectively to his chest. "I'll do it myself. Go back to your reading, officer." With a shrug, Surti continued on. After relieving himself, Surti resumed his study of the current inmates. His eyes scanned the papyrus ledgers before him. At Tet Zozenk, tomb robbery, desecration of human remains. Itin Tep, robbery, murder, usage and trade of forbidden pharmaceuticals. Ran Tefthes, organization and leadership of armed banditry, mass murder, rape, thievery, robbery, tomb robbery, desecration of human remains, inhuman cruelty, manufacture, usage, and trade of forbidden pharmaceuticals. Seshat II, use of forbidden pharmaceuticals, negligent murder. Zoten Tut, exploitation of slaves, inhuman cruelty, rape, alliance with the serpent people. Some of these were more interesting than others, Surti thought, before realizing the grimness of his thinking. Suddenly he remembered the curious unguarded nature of the cells below. Was a guard down there now? If not, did one need to be present? Surti decided to see for himself. Pushing his seat away from the table, he made his way toward the stairs that led down into the cells. The prisoners watched him with a quiet intensity that was markedly different from when he had emptied their sand jars of effluvia earlier. It was a curious air, and in times to come Surti would look with scorn upon his obliviousness to the subtle nuances in atmosphere which marked situations of danger, for, as he rounded a corner, he suddenly found himself in the quiet eye of a developing storm of chaos. For a moment his mind scrambled to make sense of the situation presented before him. In the middle of the corridor between cells sat Thutmose, his arms shackled, his eyes closed, and his head lolling. Behind him, with a sword point pressed under the captain's chin, stood one of the prisoners, and beside him another of the convicts, this one much burlier, but lacking the sharp-witted glint of malice and cruelty in his eyes that the former possessed. Both glowered menacingly at Surti, their lips pulled back in vicious snarls akin to that of cage-bred fighting dogs. "Stop where you stand, or I'll slit his throat," growled the prisoner with the sword. His head was shaven, and a vicious scar marred his lean, sunken cheeks. Surti recognized him. He was one of the more notorious prisoners in Sumenkhthet, the infamous brigand leader Ran Tefthes, who had marauded his way across the sands and plains of Kem for years before finally being apprehended. Surti froze, unsure of what to do. "Take out your sword and drop it on the floor," said Ran Tefthes. Surti hesitated. He knew that to give up his weapon would mean giving up his only means of self-defense and surrendering completely to men who had been imprisoned for murder, or worse, yet failure to do so could result in the death of a fellow officer. "Do it now or he dies," the prisoner growled, pressing the point of the sword deeper into Thutmose's throat. Sturdy knew he was in no position to bargain, and that further hesitation would likely result in Thutmose's death. He still wasn't sure if it was the best decision, but he had to decide now, and so he drew his khopesh and dropped it on the ground with a clatter. "Now kick it over here." The guard did as he was told, and the sickle-shaped blade slid across the pale, gritty floor. The other prisoner strode over to pick it up. He was a large, burly man with shoulder-length greasy hair and went by the name Ayat the Strangler. As Ayat picked up the weapon, a horrible, unnatural wailing noise could be heard from the back of the prison near the sealed door, where it carried itself out and filled the chamber. It was bone-chilling, a high-pitched screaming that sounded almost human, but at the same time possessed a level of insane intensity no natural human voice would ever produce. Almost immediately after it began, a series of other similar voices joined in, creating an unholy chorus that seemed to be spewing from the mouth of Hell's own choir. At that moment, all doubt regarding the veracity of Atenhotep's story of Sumenkthet's horrid history fled from Sturdy's mind, replaced by loathing and terror, for such a ghastly sound could only be produced, Sturdy knew, by mad souls imprisoned in eternal torment. These were the voices of the screamers. The large, burly prisoner hesitated, glancing back over his shoulder in the direction of the sealed door, then back to his inmate. "Just the screamers," said the smaller prisoner, still pressing his blade to the captain's throat. "Like they always do. Come on, let's get this on with. You," he gestured towards Sturdy, "get in that cell over there." Doing as he was told, and knowing that, having surrendered his weapon, he was fully committed to following the escaped prisoner's orders, Sturdy walked into one of the cells, its door hanging conspicuously open in the way no prison door cell was ever meant to. "Take his keys and lock him up." Ran-Tefthys had to raise his voice to compete with the ghastly wailing coming from below, and Sturdy was surprised at how loud it was, considering the large amount of stone which sealed the passageway, separating the lower halls from the upper. Doing as instructed, Ayat the Strangler removed the guard's keys, closing the barred door with a loud clang before locking it shut. "Let's see how he likes it, the dog," shouted another prisoner from his cell. "Now let's start letting some of these other men out," Ran-Tefthys ordered. Then, speaking loudly so that all could hear, he addressed the entirety of the prison population, or as many as were within earshot. "Listen up, you rats! We've been planning this for months, and tonight we're finally breaking out of here. There's more of us than there are of them, and once we arm ourselves, they won't be able to stop us. So we're going to work together to bust out of this hellhole. If any of you has a problem with that, you're free to rot down here with the screamers. Just stay out of our way or we'll gut you like pigs." As Ayat began releasing his fellow convicts, Ran-Tefthys procured a bucket of water from a nearby trough, which was used to hydrate both prisoners and guards alike. By dumping this brusquely over Thutmose's head and applying a series of harsh slaps and blows to the guard captain's head, he was able to bring him back to consciousness. What's the meaning of this?" Thutmose sputtered as he strained against his bonds. "Release me at once." "I'm the one giving the orders now, cur," growled Ran-Tefthys, poking the captain's ribs with the point of his sword. "Ran-Tefthys, how did—" "A little something extra slipped in with your most recent delivery of Blue Lotus," said the brigand leader with an evil smile. "A mixture of drugs that causes sleep when inhaled." "That powder you blew in my face, I remember now." Ran-Tefthys laughed evilly. Meanwhile, the screamers continued to sing their accursed litanies of the damned. Sturdy strained his ears to hear the conversation of the two. "Ran-Tefthys, we had a deal. I smuggled in Blue Lotus for you for months, and this is how you repay me? Have you no sense of honor?" The criminal laughed. "Ha ha ha! You traffic drugs to prisoners right under the nose of the Medjay, and you talk of honor? Ha! You're no worse than the rest of us." "Boss," said Ayat, returning to Ran-Tefthys' side, "what about the sorcerer? Do you want him freed?" "Keep him locked up," said the brigand leader emphatically. "He's a priest of Anubis if I've ever seen one, a powerful one, and if you think for one single minute he's a black magician, then you're even more of a fool than that vizier's lapdog, Atenhotep. If he really were a sorcerer, every guard in this place would have been turned inside out, and he would be free, nowhere to be found. Do you want me to just kill him?" "Huh, do you really think you could? No, Best to leave him as he is. If you open that cell, there's no telling what he could do. What about the guard? We could probably kill him, Ron Teftes mused. We already have our hostage. He poked Futmos once again, eliciting a brief yelp. Although maybe we could just kill the captain here and leave the lackey as our hostage. What do you say to that, Captain? Kill him, Futmos cried. I'm a captain. I'm more important and will make a more valuable hostage. Ron Teftes laughed again. Ha ha ha, spoken like a true leader. We'll put the other guard to the sword later, but for now we have more important things to attend. The convict sliced the length of rope that bound Futmos's feet together. Stand up. Don't run or I'll cut you down like the dog you are. Now, you're going to lead us to the armory. He pointed out about a dozen or so of the most vicious-looking of the newly freed prisoners. You, and you, come with me. We're going to get ourselves armed. Ayat, watch over the rest of these bastards, and if any of them give the slightest inkling of being traitorous wretches, split their skulls like melons. Ayat answered with a toothy smile as Ron Teftes, with his retinue of liberated thugs, made his way to the stairs out, using Futmos, held at sword point, to lead the way. As the screamers continued to shriek, Surti cowered in his cell, questioning the reality of the whole situation. How could anyone's luck ever be this bad? What had he done to anger the gods so? It was his first night on the job, and already he found himself surrounded by an unholy curse, in the middle of a prison revolt, and quite possibly facing his own execution. Were they really going to kill him? It seemed like the sort of thing that could only happen to someone else. Then again, being caught in the middle of a prison riot and encountering black magic were also the kinds of things that seemed like they could only happen to somebody else. Surti slumped onto the ground, removed his cot, and buried his face in his hands. It was time to face the truth. He was probably going to die. But was there a chance? Perhaps the other guards were well trained in how to handle such an emergency. Surti knew there were many secrets to Sumenkhthet Prison, and with clever thinking and fast action, perhaps the rebellion could be quashed. Also, while his captors had taken his weapon and imprisoned him, they hadn't shackled him. He could still fight, and he could still run. Anything was better, he reasoned, than simply bowing before the sword of his executioners. If they came to kill him, they would, at some point, have to open the door to his cell, and then he would fight like a cornered jackal. Better to die on his feet fighting than to die on his knees begging. At that moment, his fear was replaced by steely resolve and simmering anger. Futmos was a hyena. He was trafficking Blue Lotus to the prisoners and probably making a hefty profit from it. That was probably why he was so eager to help Surti empty the sand jars. Most likely it was how he transported the drugs. Surti gritted his teeth and vowed that, if he got out of this alive, the captain of the night watch would pay for his skullduggery.